Hello everyone, my name is Jana Tabar. Today I'm talking to about the Bandala System. The Bandala System was a system implemented by Spanish 1521 to 1898 authorities in the Philippines that required native Filipino farmers to sell their goods to the government. The farmers were not in favor of this system and were not even offered fair market prices for their crops. What was the Bandala System? When Spain began to colonize the Philippines, the land was split into parcels and divided among dignitaries and distinguished officers of the military. Parcel owners were required to care for the native inhabitants of his land, providing for their well-being and protection. Within a short time, abuses became apparent and it was discontinued in favor of a new system in which the natives were required to pay tax or a tribute to the government, a form of direct taxes that the Spaniards implemented at which the natives were coerced to sell their products to the government at very low price. The Repartimiento and Bandala system were types of paid labor tribute the Philippines Jews were required to provide in addition to paying actual tribute in specie, money in the form of coins. In the 17th century, Philippines to Bandala entailed the compulsory sale of goods to the government, with each province fulfilling a specified quota. Individuals were meant to be paid by the government or by the promissory note for labor and goods supply under this system. However, chronic financial shortages experienced by the treasury in Manila mean that these debts were rarely ever paid and both systems therefore came to be viewed by Philippine Jews as another form of servitude or indenture. Bandala system operated on massive exploitation, corruption, and the manipulation of indigenous communities by indigenous principal and Spanish officials alike. In 1620, the Franciscan Fray Pedro de San Pablo issued a damning report on the exploitative nature of the Repartimiento in Bandala system, alleging that loyal officials and alcaldes maroyes rarely paid for the goods supplied by the indigenous communities or for the labor rendered under the Repartimiento system. Indigenous rarely receive payment for either labor or goods supply under the two system, and the natural consequence was a shortage of specie in indigenous communities, which meant that most indigenous could not pay tribute to the encomenderos or engage in any other form of monetary exchange. When individuals were unable to pay tribute to the local encomendero of to provide their quota of goods, the bandala there could be fined or jailed. Some reports indicate the individuals sold themselves into slavery to pay these debts. Meanwhile, corrupt local indigenous leaders often accepted payment in exchange for exception from the draft. Indios were often pulled away from their fields at harvest time, and many died from overwork and abusive treatment at the hands of their supervisor. Don Diego de Villatoro wrote the exploitation of the indigenous population under this system had caused large number of Indios to flee into the mountain, abandoning the Catholic religion. To Villatoro, the only solution was to implement the numerous royal decrees issued since 1649, and he proposed that Indians be exempted from performing personal service or providing goods and supply free of charge to the secular and religious official in the province. A petition written in 1680 by a group of Pampangan principals suggests that the province had been depopulated from 8,000 tributes to 3,000 in just 15 years, most of the population having fled the province to avoid the Repartimiento in Bandala system. They argued that the Pampangas were forced to work vertically until they dropped dead, and that the only ones paid for their labor were the overseers. Indios looking for ways to exempt themselves from the Departamento and Bandala system might also enlist on galleons bound for New Spain or simply abandon Spanish towns. Spanish officials recommended accepting only those who provided the most exceptional service to the crown, primarily Indios who had service in the military. Furthermore, some Indios sought to be permanently exempted from the tribute payments in the Departamento and Bandala system because of their military records. Revolt against Polo and Bandala, Pampanga Revolt. The government then incurred a large debt on the Pampangos after its requisition in their rice harvest. The first Pampanga Revolt in 1585 was undertaken by native Kapampangan leaders against Spanish encomenderos due to abuse felt by the natives inflicted by the encomenderos. The revolt included a plot to storm Intramuros. However, the plot was spoiled before it was even implemented since a Filipina married to a Spanish soldier supported to the plot Spanish authorities for their action. The leaders of the revolt were ordered executed. The revolt ended when Magalat was killed by Filipinos who were hired by the Spaniards to kill him. The Bandala system has been another way for Spaniards to increase funds for wars against other European explorers.